Ano ang mga pagsubok na kinakaharap mo sa pag-aaral at pagtuturo ngayong pandemya? Ano ang mga hakbang na ginagawa ng mga institusyon ngayong remote learning? Ano pa ang mga maaaring gawin ng gobyerno para sa mga estudyante, guro at institusyon ng higher learning? Ano-ano ang mga issue sa higher education na dapat bigyang pansin ng mga kakandidato sa darating na eleksyon? Higher education in the next normal, harmonizing towards complementarity, continuity, and competitiveness. Bahagi ng hashtag Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series. Ngayong February 3, alas 10 ng umaga. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor Task Force Nation Building at ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, Higher Education, Research and Policy Reform Program. Ano ang mga pagsubok na kinakaharap mo sa pag-aaral at pagtuturo ngayong pandemya? Ano ang mga hakbang na ginagawa ng mga institusyon ngayong remote learning? Ano pa ang mga maaaring gawin ng gobyerno para sa mga estudyante, guro at institusyon ng higher learning? Ano-ano ang mga issue sa higher education na dapat bigyang pansin ng mga kakandidato sa darating na eleksyon? Higher education in the next normal, harmonizing towards complementarity, continuity, and competitiveness. Bahagi ng hashtag Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series. Ngayong February 3, alas 10 ng umaga. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor Task Force Nation Building at ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, Higher Education, Research and Policy Reform Program. Ano ang mga pagsubok na kinakaharap mo sa pag-aaral at pagtuturo ngayong pandemya? Ano ang mga hakbang na ginagawa ng mga institusyon ngayong remote learning? Ano pa ang mga maaaring gawin ng gobyerno para sa mga estudyante, guro at institusyon ng higher learning? Ano-ano ang mga issue sa higher education na dapat bigyang pansin ng mga kakandidato sa darating na eleksyon? Higher education in the next normal, harmonizing towards complementarity, continuity, and competitiveness. Bahagi ng hashtag Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series. Ngayong February 3, alas 10 ng umaga. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor Task Force Nation Building at ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, Higher Education, Research and Policy Reform Program.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for coming into this webinar. I am Nelson Kainghog, and I will be your MC and moderator for today. I am an assistant professor from the Department of Political Science of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. This is a Pilipilunas webinar, Higher Education in the Next Normal, Harmonizing Towards Complementarity, Continuity, and Competitiveness. We are also live streaming on the UPD CIDS Facebook page. These webinars co-organizers are the UP Diliman Task Force Nation Building, an initiative of the UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor, the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, specifically the Higher Education Research and Policy Reform Program, and is co-presented by DZUP 1602. With us this morning, distinguished panelists and reactors from the higher education and some also from the basic education sector, who will be giving us some insights on these very important topics. So we have with us this morning of course, as the host of this webinar, we have Dr. Fidel Nemenzo, the Chancellor of UP Diliman. We also have our panelist, Dr. Cynthia Bautista, Vice President for Academic Affairs of the UP system, Dr. Patricia Arinto, Dean of UP Visayas Tacloban College and Professor of the UP Open University. We also have Dr. Dina Ocampo, Professor of the UP College of Education. And we are, of course, lucky to have also our reactors, Undersecretary Diosdado San Antonio of the Department of Education, Executive Director David Bongalion of the National Institute for Technical Education and Skills Development, Chairperson Edicio de la Torre of Education for Life, Dr. Christian Brian Bustamante, Dean College of Arts and Sciences of San Beda University, and Vice Chair of the Commission on Tertiary Education of PAASCO. For Building the Nation, we have Dr. Antoinette Raquiza. So without further ado, we will start the webinar. And in order to provide us the context of this worthy undertaking and to formally open this event, may we call on Professor Fidel R. Nemenzo, Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Sir.
Salamat, Nelson. Magandang umaga sa lahat. Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. This is part of Pilipiluna's 2022 Pagbangon at Pagsulong tungo sa Magandang Buhay at Bukas. Now, this is a series of roundtable discussions on governance and development issues organized by the UP Diliman Task Force Nation Building under the Office of the Chancellor. This morning's webinar discussion on higher education in the next normal is co-organized by the Program on Higher Education Research and Policy Reform of UP CIDS. The Pilipiluna's 2022 webinar series is our university's response to two imperatives of the times. The first is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has exposed the vulnerabilities of the Philippine state and development pattern. The economic and health crisis that we are reeling from is a reminder of the need to strengthen state capacity, especially in the delivery of health and other social services on one hand, and to deepen and broaden the domestic foundations of growth. The second imperative is the coming national elections this May, and the turnover of political power to a new, if not different, set of leaders. You know, national elections are always deeply consequential, but these 2022 electoral exercises come in the midst of a deep existential crisis that has heightened debates on policy issues and political platforms. You know, nation building has always been at the core of UP's mission. We were founded behind the idea that a modern nation needs the contributions of its people, and that the National University, with its threefold mandate of teaching, research, and public service, is perhaps the central institution delivering on this need. Last year, we formed the Task Force Nation Building that will lead the Pilipiluna's 2022 initiative in coordinating with faculty, researchers from different units of our university to reflect on the state of our nation and present a multidisciplinary approach to problem solving. From the series of roundtable discussions, we will draw up a governance agenda that we hope to contribute to the national conversation leading to and beyond the 2022 elections. We want to impress on our policymakers and the public our university's readiness to help our country rebuild our political, economic, socio-cultural institutions on more stable, sustainable, and equitable foundations. The Pilipiluna's 2022 series was launched last August 2021 with a webinar that set the tone and frame for the series by asking the basic question, ano nga ba ang magandang buhay at bukas para sa mga Pilipino? This was followed by the webinar on the public transportation sector that was convened by the National Center for Transportation Studies last October. With UPCIDS and the Political Science Department. Our series had 3 more webinars: Balota and Politica, a webinar on electoral and political reforms. We had a webinar on local governance that reviewed the 30-year-old local government code. And finally, last December, a webinar on strategic Philippine foreign relations, capping the series for 2021. Now, this morning's webinar will focus on higher education. We have seen how the pandemic has compelled us to move out of our comfort zones and transition our institutions into more agile and resilient modes of teaching and learning. But for many, the pandemic has merely hastened changes that were long overdue. Globalization, the new technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and all sorts of disruptions brought about by the pandemic and other crises. These are creating paradigm shifts, such as the shift from traditional to outcome-based learning, learner-focused education, the shift from education to lifelong learning, etc. These are compelling us to ask new questions about the role of universities and the directions of higher education. In this webinar, we will look at the consequences of these changes and discuss the imperatives and shape of Philippine higher education in the next normal. I would like to thank the UP Diliman Task Force Nation Building and its chair, Dr. Tonet Raquiza, for organizing the Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series. Thank you to the convener of today's webinar on higher education, Dr. Hernan Paragas, convener of the UP-CIDS Higher Education Research and Policy Reform Program, and of course our moderator, Professor Nelson Cainghog. Thank you to our other partners in this project, DZUP and the UP Diliman Information Office. Finally, I'd like to thank our panelists, VP Cinch Bautista, Dean Pat Arinto, Dr. Dina Ocampo, and our discussants, Yusek Diosdado San Antonio of DepEd, Chairperson Ed De La Torre of Education for Life, Executive Director David Bugalion of the National Institute for Technical Education and Skills Development, and Dean Christian Brian Bustamante of the College of Arts and Sciences of San Beda University. And thank you everyone for joining us in this morning's event. I wish all of you a fruitful and stimulating discussion. Maraming salamat po. Magandang umaga.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Nemenzo, for reiterating the mandate of the university, especially in these interesting times with the pandemic and the upcoming national elections. So we will await, of course, the outcome, the proceedings of this webinar that would also be disseminated. Thank you, sir. And moving forward, we will please ask everyone to post your questions on the Q&A Google form. It's in https bit.ly/Pilipilunas Q&A. So it's a bit.ly link, Pilipilunas Q&A. So and is spelled as a word, no? Hindi siya yung ampersand. The questions will be read during the open forum, and we encourage the use of hashtag Pilipilunas2022 in post about the event. So moving forward, to start our discussion, to talk about higher education policy, may we call on our first speaker, the Vice President for Academic Affairs of UP. But before that, a brief introduction. Dr. Maria Cynthia Rose Banson Bautista is full professor of the Sociology in the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and currently Vice President for Academic Affairs of the UP system and member of the Board of Trustees of the Philippine Institute of Development Studies. She also served as longtime Executive Director of the university's Center for Integrative and Development Studies, the UP System's Policy Research Unit. She was also the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy of UP Diliman, before her secondment to the Commission on Higher Education as Commissioner. Dr. Bautista also chaired the Executive Board of the Philippine Social Science Council, the UNESCO National Commission Social Sciences and Humanities Committee, and the Regional Task Force on the ASEAN Qualifications Reference Framework. Ladies and gentlemen, BP Cynthia Bautista. Ma'am.
Thank you very much, Nelson. I'll just show my slides. So my task this morning is to actually answer the questions that the organizers posed for me, but I will not answer them. I'll combine all my answers and hopefully answer all of the questions. But the questions were, what is the shape and form of higher education in the next normal? What lessons have we learned from the pandemic and that should inform higher education policies and programs in the next normal? So this is before and after the pandemic, towards promoting complementarity, inclusiveness, continuity, and quality. What policies and interventions are needed? How can we all work together? How helpful are recent initiatives, and some examples of recent initiatives were actually given. This is the structure of Philippine higher education. 72% of our higher education institutions are private. 27.8% is actually public. And if you look at the breakdown, 58% is non-sectarian, 14% is sectarian. Local colleges and universities constitute 5%. The state universities and colleges are about 4.6%. SUC satellite campuses 17.6%. In the next normal actually refers to immediate next normal all the way to maybe medium term and maybe even long term next normal. I mean, in the short and possibly medium term next normal, the structure of higher education will not change much unless more SUCs are established and more LUCs are established. It's important to note that most of the satellite campuses of SUCs and most of the SUCs are also established since 1990. But there are problems also if we expand too much. But anyway, okay. These are some of the persistent issues in Philippine higher education, and this is only an initial listing. Inequitable access, uneven quality, the underdeveloped innovations ecosystem, an increasing lack of complementarity of public and private education, which is now a private education crisis. On access, basically the poor, I mean, if this is judging just from income and judging from the AP's surveys, the poorest are not able to really get into higher education, whether it's public or private. Of course, in the private schools, fewer poorest are able to come in, and you have more of the richest. But even if you look at the public institutions, you have fewer of them. So in terms of participation rate, 12% among the poor are able to get into higher ed. And this actually tells us that we should strengthen basic ed, and that this is actually understandable because many of the poor students actually drop out earlier. Uneven quality, I think uneven quality has been an issue for a long time. When we were defending the referencing of the Philippine Qualifications Framework to the ASEAN Qualifications Reference Framework, we were told that unless we write that the quality is uneven in our report, it will not be endorsed because people outside the Philippines know the unevenness of our system. Sorry. So this is I will not say much about the innovation system. That's a whole topic in itself in terms of our research culture, in terms of our output, in terms of support for research and development. But that is a real big problem. Now, the other one is the private sector, public-private complementarity issue, the lack of complementarity. The student while I was saying earlier that you have most of our institutions are private. Their share has actually dwindled to 56% in 2017, slightly lower than that in 2019. The crisis, for instance, you have, if you compare the private and the public institutions were able to recover enrollment. The private institutions were not able to recover enrollment after the 2 years of K-12. But anyway, all of these issues must be situated within context because we have to now look at our context when we start discussing the issues that I mentioned earlier and the issues that are not written here or not presented here. This is how the world will be. It will be a very disruptive world. I think COVID actually gave us the practice Our world, it's a practice also for climate change. Maybe climate change might even be worse, but it's a disruptive future technologically because of the fourth industrial revolution. You have global warming and climate change. You have zoonosis and pandemics, which we used to talk about before in the abstract. I never thought that the pandemic would be like this. So there are realities also, globalization-related realities, although of course we have the swing to nationalism in many countries, but you have national and regional frameworks with learning outcomes as metrics, quality assurance of education providers and programs are there, internationalization, etc. And the global response is education for sustainable development and lifelong learning, so that our people are able to adapt to the evolving requirements of the labor market, in quotes, and the changing timeframes and rhythms of individual existence. That translates to certain skills that are needed that were not needed maybe during our time. But basically, I just put this here. Interestingly, there was MIT actually put together all the different skills that are being developed and then classify them this way. I'm not going to talk about the details. And McKinsey and company actually put what they call the distinct elements of talent. They don't call them skills anymore because they're combined. But what is interesting here is you also have self-leadership and what are the kinds of skills for the graduates. They should have grit and resistance, coping and uncertainty. So you have all of these general categories, but just to say that the world, the disruptive world, also requires different competencies and skills on the part of the graduates that we will be producing. We have to change the curriculum. The curriculum cannot be the same as before. There's no going back to the normal. The next normal is already upon us. In fact, COVID-19 actually made it faster or catalyzed the whole process of changing. I just want to share that in a keynote address in the Times Higher Education Teaching Excellence Summit, there is an entire literature on the reason for why we have to shift our paradigm and how learning happens. And actually in this particular keynote speech, he says that, and this is really the brain that changes itself, that the brain is not static. The changed neurons are there are actually developed by intense, you're able to change neurons in the brain by intense thinking and improve capabilities. It's like the proper brain exercise. So the way we used to teach before, where everything was lecture, if there it's not a lecture and lab class, is not going to work. And I think later on there will be a whole discussion on this by Pat. But just an example, there was an example of a teaching, this is a physics class, and they had a control group and an experimental group. Control group was a standard lecture class, highly experienced professor with very good student ratings. The experimental class was same material, same time, but a new physics PhD trained in research-based teaching methods, and the difference in learning in the entire is actually very significant. So because we have to exercise the brain, innovative research-based classroom says you have to have challenging, more realistic problems, student practicing decisions, figure out solution paths and information needed, collaboration, ed tech enhancement, etc. So I'll just leave it at that because I think that will be developed further later on. So what are the imperatives in the next normal? This is just a first approximation. There are many imperatives because we have many problems. But the first one is fully accomplish the paradigm shift from education to learning. That is, learning outcomes is the metric. We have to change our modes of delivery, our assessments. But this is because the quality of our education programs for the students of the future or a disruptive future that is already upon us rests on all of these changes. We actually, on paper, in 2012, already shifted to outcomes, learning outcomes-based education. All of us have struggled with it, but the learning outcomes based in spirit is really something that we have to work on. So this is not yet fully accomplished, and this has to be fully accomplished. The second is develop lifelong learning pathways in higher education. And this is, I think, going to be discussed later on because Ed is here, that addresses equity and retooling of quality workforce. Part of this is developing stackable programs, micro-credentials, but you also need to substantiate and institutionalize the Philippine credit transfer system that recognizes formal and non-formal learning. Why is it equity? Because there are pathways. So you can have an associate degree and get out and get back to school. And so this is also a way of very poor students are not able to get into the universities that they want to get into. They get into programs that's some stackable programs that allow them to be able to come into the university if they want to in the future, but they can also go out and work. There is a Philippine credit transfer system. At least this is not yet institutionalized. This was already discussed by CHED, but this is a multi-agency effort to put up a credit transfer system that is able to work on joint programs for which you get credit for in the technical field that you get credit for in higher education, and also equivalencies in terms of formal and informal learning, work experience, etc. So the third one is so this is like among our ASEAN neighbors, there's a whole discussion about lifelong learning. On the other side, it's really lifelong learning to retool those who have graduated, because they need to be retooled and they come back, and there are programs also for them, stackable programs as well as degree programs, even for those who have already graduated from our institution. So it's exits and entries at different points for those for those who are coming into the higher ed system, and those have gone out but have to go back to the higher ed system. And the third one, and this is the biggest challenge, this is like the K-12 of the 21st century, is implementing and institutionalizing the Philippine Qualifications framework, also to address quality as well as rationalize the higher education system. This is the Philippine Qualifications framework. Many of us don't know, it's very abstract. Many of us don't know that this is already a law. It was promulgated 2-3 years ago, and that there is a system which is based on learning outcomes, or learning outcomes are the metric, and it's very clear in terms of what the competencies are, what the knowledge, skills, and values, how they are applied, and the degree of independence that's required. So, for instance, the doctorate degree, in terms of knowledge and skills, demonstrated highly advanced systematic knowledge and skills in highly specialized and multidisciplinary fields, etc., applied for professional leadership, for innovation, research, and or development management. And then the degree of independence is full independence and able to work and lead in complex fields. What are the challenges? I mean, these are very simple descriptors if you would look at them. Even if you look at the BS or the BA descriptors, they're also simply put. But there are challenges. The need to ascertain whether higher education baccalaureate programs achieve level 6 learning outcomes, and the graduate programs, the learning outcomes at level 7 and at level 8. So who will assess the learning outcomes and determine their levels? Will it be the QA bodies? Will it be the Commission on Higher Education? Will it be QA and CHED at the same time? Or the HEIs, the higher education institutions themselves? Are they aware of this need and preparing for it? A concrete example is we have a lot of engineering programs across all of our higher education institutions, and we teach them at different levels. Some of the engineering programs may be producing technologies, but they are nevertheless classified as BS degrees. That means that maybe if the outcomes are outcomes for technologists and not for engineers at higher levels, then that should not be level 6, that should be level 5. This is going to be very, very controversial and very political. So I'm saying this is going to be like K-12 in terms of its impact on institutions, but it will rationalize our system and also rationalize the programs and degrees that we actually offer. Operationalizing public-private complementarity. I think this has always been there. The Constitution is there, but I think we have to substantiate and define the roles of government and different types of public and private higher education institutions. Curb the growth of SUCs and LUCs and formulate policy options for greater inclusiveness while raising the ante for technical education. It is important for us to change the mindset of our public. Technical and vocational education is critical and important, but we have always disregarded it, but we have to raise the ante for it. identify flagship institutions among top public and private universities, and support their synergy in providing graduate degrees and producing cutting-edge research, innovations, and technologies, rather than waiting for the establishment of SUCs without a research track record to reach the level of Tier 1 SUCs and private institutions, and strengthen the regulatory capacity of CHED to weed out non-compliant programs and institutions among some imperatives. So there are 3 questions that the organizers raised, and more or less the shape I already answered. What lessons have we learned? The pandemic catalyzed these changes. These changes were supposed to have begun even before the pandemic, but the pandemic hastened much of it, especially changes in our pedagogy and changes in our assessments. Towards promoting, I also discussed what needs to be done. We have to really substantiate the complementarity between public and private institutions. How many HEIs go? How can we work together? There are many platforms for working together. Our HEIs are organized. I guess there are also, apart from HEIs and government agencies and higher education institute organizations, we also have the private sector, because we have to go and get into academic industry linkages and a lot of immersion. So there are already platforms for that. I guess we just have to strengthen, and we just have to have more dialogues among the sectors and work together towards achievement of all of the changes in higher ed, because it cannot just be done by one sector. How helpful are recent initiatives? For instance, the tertiary education subsidy, Dr. Para sa Bayan, and the future suggestions, Education Plus, National Education Council. I just like to say the TS, assuming the sustainability of our Free Tuition Act, TES is a very powerful tool in a sense. It provides the same amount of money for free higher education is given for tertiary education subsidy. It has helped many. It has also addressed some of the private school issues, because students in private schools where you do not have any CHED recognized CHED recognized LUC or SUC are provided TES. There were some issues in the first year, understandably, in terms of release of funds, but I guess that has been addressed. Dr. Para sa Bayan, of course, we know the value of Dr. Para sa Bayan. Education Plus, in terms of its goals, it aims to break the cycle of poverty among Filipino families. And I think it has yet to be worked out. Free tuition for whom? Will it be for all? I guess that's a question. And I guess you also have to look at whether a country can sustain free tuition for continuously. But National Education Council, there is already a bill, a Senate bill on the National Education Council. The president of the country must always move education. On the other hand, there is also a National Coordinating Council for the Philippine Qualifications Framework. I think it is very important that the Philippine Qualifications Framework, as well as education, we get together, because they are not separate. The Philippine Qualifications Framework is actually the one that will also profoundly help organize and rationalize higher education, as well as basic, as well as tertiary education. So those are just my comments within 15 minutes, and maybe I'll just answer the questions later.
Thank you, VP Cynthia Bautista, for that very informative input on higher education. So as we are actually trying to level up with the pandemic, you are also responding to the old problems of unevenness and inequality. Very challenging times indeed for higher education. Moving forward to talk about learning in the next normal, may we call on our second speaker, Dr. Patricia Arinto, who is currently the Dean of the UP Visayas Tacloban College. She is currently part of the international project Advancing Equity and Access to Higher Education through Open and Distance Learning, or Bukas, a project supported by the European Commission's Erasmus Plus program. She's a former Dean of the Faculty of Education of the UP Open University, And in 2012, she led a USAID-funded assessment of the state of information and communications technology in basic education in the Philippines, and an Australian government-funded study on tablets for teaching and learning. She was also the deputy principal investigator of the multi-country research on open educational resources for development in the Global South. And she was also the faculty regent of the University of the Philippines system. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Patricia Arinto. Ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just share my presentation. Okay. Again, good morning, colleagues and friends. My task this morning is to share with you some thoughts about learning in the next normal. In terms of the questions posed by the organizers of this forum, this short presentation partially addresses the questions, what should be the shape and form of Philippine higher education in the next normal? What lessons have we learned before, from, and during the pandemic that can inform national higher education policies and programs in the next normal? A caveat, the way I address these questions is in a very micro, if you like, micro level and practical way. Basically what I intend to do is to just offer one possibility, one concrete way of approaching it. To begin with, what is the next normal, or the new normal as it is sometimes referred to? VP Sinch has already described this very well. So let me just summarize. Basically, the answer is summed up by the acronym VUCA, which turns out to have been coined not recently, but as long ago as 30 years, more than 30 years ago. So V in VUCA is for volatile, which means unstable, constantly changing, and turbulent. U is for uncertain, which means it is unpredictable and unreliable. And C is for complex. It is characterized by multiple dimensions and interlocking parts, moving parts, and it's extremely complicated. And A is for ambiguous, which means that it has multiple meanings, not just one, and also unclear and unsettled. This VUCA world is characterized by disruption, instability, and variability. The causes include natural disasters, increasingly intensified by climate change, public health emergencies, political upheavals, and socioeconomic crises, among others. By now, we are all too familiar with what VUCA feels like and its effects on the education sector. So how do we cope with VUCA? How do we survive? And beyond surviving, how do we thrive? How do we flourish? What knowledge and skills should we develop? Should we teach and learn? And how do we do so? The answers to these questions have become increasingly clear, I think, to higher education institutions after 2 years of pandemic, going on 3, and various other crises that have turned our world and our lives upside down. I also think that these answers are not entirely new. They existed even before the pandemic, except that at the time, many of us did not yet recognize the questions or challenges that they can help us address. Beyond thinking about the questions and the answers, perhaps what we educators and education advocates are called to do is to chart a new direction for education, or as Kate Denial puts it, to stop passively, fearfully trying to stay afloat in the turbulent waters, but to reimagine the voyage altogether. More concretely, we are called upon to rethink how we teach and learn. As John Kohn states, education institutions need to have a vision for teaching and learning that is inclusive and accessible to learners and responsive to the massive changes we experienced over the past 2 years and which we are likely to continue to experience in the coming years. We are, of course, also called upon to rethink what to teach and learn, but as that is both less and more contentious, let us first consider the how. First, there is blended learning, which combines in-person or face-to-face teaching and learning and remote online learning. In other words, it is a mix of the traditional synchronous classroom-based teaching and learning that was the norm before the pandemic, and the technology-supported asynchronous distance learning that we had to rapidly adopt in the COVID era. There are various combinations or blends that can be adopted depending on your and your learners' needs and resources. Here are 4 blended learning scenarios featuring different combinations of asynchronous and synchronous learning activities done online and face-to-face. So scenario 1 is a mix of guided independent study of pre-recorded lectures and readings to be done by individual students working independently, followed by face-to-face in-class tutorials, lab work, or discussion. Scenario 2 is a mix of online lectures given live by the teacher or pre-recorded, followed by face-to-face in-class tutorials, laboratory work, or discussion. And scenario 3 is entirely online, combining online lectures, which may be pre-recorded or delivered live by the teacher, and online seminars, discussions, or tutorials. So what is blended here are synchronous and asynchronous activities. And scenario 4 combines hybrid face-to-face sessions where the teacher lectures to students attending the class in person and other students joining online, followed by either online or face-to-face tutorials. So what other blends can you think of? Which blend suits you? In terms of what makes for effective pedagogy, there is a consensus among education experts that flipped learning is the way to go. This is blended learning where work that is traditionally done in the classroom, such as listening to lectures, is done at home, and work that is traditionally done as homework, such as tutorials and projects, is done in class for the teacher to give feedback on. So flipped learning is a principle that should ideally be observed, whatever blend is adopted. Blended learning, many of the discussions of and training workshops on blended learning present it as an option for individual courses. I would like to suggest that in our VUCA world, education institutions need to plan blended learning beyond individual courses to the level of programs across the institution in order to ensure that learning is accessible to all students wherever they might be. Classrooms and campuses are not crowded, and rapid shifts from in-person to remote learning can take place whenever necessary. So blended learning at the program level and across the institution would take the form of mixed mode education. This requires determining which courses, for example, can be offered entirely online, which can be offered in a blended format, and which will need to be taught face-to-face. So here is a sample configuration. Bridge courses and general education courses may be taught entirely online. Your major courses that are in the form of lectures predominantly may be taught blended or online. Your laboratory courses will need to be taught in person in the classroom on campus. Practicum courses can be taught in any of these 3 ways. There are, of course, in-person practicum courses, but there are also blended ones, and you can have virtual internships. Physical education courses, well, we know already can be taught online, but people may want to really teach them in person and learn them in person, and you can have a blended mode. And there is, of course, the National Service Training Program that has been taught blended and online altogether these past 2 years. So this is, as I said, an example of mixed mode education. The second strategy that we might consider for teaching and learning in the next normal is something called micro-learning. This consists of shorter, more focused lessons or learning units that have been condensed to their most essential elements. For the next normal, these micro-lessons should ideally be in digital format. An example are the iBlocks, or internal blended learning online courses offered by the National University of Singapore. These are defined as bite-sized video vignettes and online reading materials that students study independently before attending face-to-face tutorials. And another perhaps more familiar example are Moocs, or massive open online courses. These are online courses that are open to all, offered free of charge and usually without prerequisites or admission requirements, and which can accommodate large enrollments, hence the word massive. Many of you may be familiar with the Mooc platform Coursera, through which several leading US universities like Yale and Stanford offer their Moocs. There is also the Future Learn platform, where leading British, American, Australian, and European universities offer their Moocs. There is a wide range of Moocs on various topics and in all disciplines that are available to learners anywhere in the world. Here are some of the Moocs on Future Learn. Notice the short duration of each Mooc, from 2 to 3 weeks to 5 to 6 weeks. There are even Moocs that you can complete in a day, like these examples here. So why should institutions, universities consider redesigning their courses as Moocs to be offered internally to their own students as iMoocs, internal Moocs, if not to the whole wide world? In our VUCA world, Moocs can be more disruption tolerant than conventional in-person and online courses. The short duration means that the course would be interrupted by fewer disruptions than could occur during a longer time frame. In any case, they provide for greater flexibility, both for individual learners and institutions. Learners can study them anywhere and anytime, and they can be combined into bigger courses and programs. Second, because they are short, they are not only easier to work through and complete. Learners can do that on their own, but also more effective in terms of the degree to which they can engage learners' brains. Dr. Bautista has already talked about, the brain being more, learning more better, more effectively in short bursts when something is intense, an intense learning experience. Third, short lessons are easier to review and repeat until you develop mastery. And mastered lessons in turn can be built upon more effectively. They can be transferred better. These types of lessons can promote teaching that is more focused on core content and which would aim to foster deep learning. The idea is not to simplify the topic when we say core content, that we do not want to simplify, but rather to think through, to figure out the most effective organization of concepts that would facilitate learning. And fifth, with Moocs and other such formats, institutions can explore curricular innovations, reach more learners, and engage multiple communities, among others. So consider, for example, this Mooc on the science of well-being, offered by Yale University. It's also called the Happiness Course. Before the pandemic struck, more than 22,000 students had enrolled in the course. By April 2020, more than 800,000 students had registered, and enrollment continues to increase. Before this Happiness Course, the blockbuster Mooc was the first Mooc on artificial intelligence offered by Stanford University, and of course they are now offering many more courses on AI. Moocs can be combined into certificate and even graduate programs, as in the case of Georgia Tech's online Master of Science in Computer Science program. One of the features of Moocs is that they are gradeless or grade-free. Students enrolled in Moocs do not earn letter or numerical grades, but badges or certificates of completion. Beyond Moocs, we might consider going gradeless or as a strategy for fostering the type of learning that we need to cope and flourish in a VUCA world. Advocates of going gradeless argue that grades do not promote effective learning because they make learning a stressful experience and they encourage learning for extrinsic reasons. They point out that grades do not always reflect the quality of learning and the level of effort put in by a learner. Aside from being inaccurate, grading can sometimes reflect bias and exacerbate inequality. Also, while grades are prevalent in formal education, learning outside the classroom, which we do all the time, is gradeless. We engage in informal learning, as it's called. For example, learning how to cook, learning how to drive, learning how to administer CPR, not to earn a grade, but to learn a skill that we need or value. So doing away with grades can reduce unhealthy competition among learners and promote collaboration instead. It can also help learners be more self-regulated and self-directed, which is important in disruption-prone learning contexts. Teachers will have to think about what about the lesson can motivate students to learn better instead of the desire to get a higher grade or fear of being given a low or failing grade. And since learning will still have to be assessed, albeit without using grades, the teachers will need to give more meaningful feedback and students will need to engage with the feedback that is provided in order to improve their learning. And most importantly, removing grades from the equation can encourage students to take intellectual risks by studying more challenging topics and enrolling in courses outside their comfort zone. For all the reasons cited, doing away with grades can be a strategy for developing love of learning and learning how to learn skills, which are essential for everyone in a VUCA world, where what one knows quickly becomes obsolete and one has to learn, unlearn, and relearn throughout life. So my interest in blended learning, the Mooc micro-learning format and doing away with grades springs from the notion that to make learning more effective, we need to be attending to the deep structures of how we learn. For me, these strategies, as we tend to think of them, invite us to consider the conditions of learning and what happens when we are engaged in learning, in deep learning. How do we learn new concepts, especially those that are complex? How do we develop skills, build on them, and transfer them? What fosters deep learning? I think that blended learning, Moocs, and going gradeless offer us some principles that we might apply to more formal university-based instruction or education. As an example, let me share some thoughts about applying these strategies to GE or general education, which is a very important component of the higher education curriculum. I suggest that higher education institutions in particular pay more attention to GE, which serves as the bedrock or foundation of the undergraduate curriculum. But instead of the traditional mode of delivering GE courses, I suggest a virtual GE program composed entirely of Moocs or GE Moocs. These would be short, more focused courses in the humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, and mathematics. They can vary in terms of format and pedagogy. For example, there can be courses that are like book clubs, and others that are run like workshops. Different topics can be taught in different ways, such as virtual walking tours and even multiplayer online games in history, for example. Students will not be given grades in these courses. Instead, they will earn badges or certificates of completion. They would be assessed using different types of assessment. Some of the courses can be required, but in addition, we can give students a wider choice of courses. They can choose from a wide selection with a minimum number of credits set for each domain or track. And once they complete the required number of credits, they could be asked to submit as a capstone project a digital portfolio of their best work from the courses that they took, and submit this with a reflective essay where they articulate what they have learned from the GE program. It is important to focus on GE as the core curriculum, as GE is the core curriculum which will develop the capacity to develop, assess, and communicate understanding of the world in all its volatility and complexity. GE does this by exposing students to the breadth of knowledge and the foundations of and connections among the disciplines, which should make them well-rounded experts and professionals and prepare them to engage and contribute to the world. Now, why GE Moocs? Well, because offered in the form of Moocs, GE courses would develop critical skills, which in the present age should include not only critical thinking, but also critical digital literacies, as well as problem solving and creativity, among others. This format would also open or make available GE courses on critical topics to all students, regardless of where they are and which campus they come from. Students may be better engaged with these GE Moocs because of the variety of courses that they can choose from, since the number of GE courses can be easily increased by redesigning existing GE courses into shorter, more focused Moocs. And also, they can be better engaged with the shorter course duration and the digital pedagogies that are employed. And so it would be therefore possible for GE Moocs to develop learning how to learn skills, as well as passion for learning, which are essential to surviving and thriving in the next normal. Thank you. We can talk about some aspects of this perhaps later. Thank you.
Okay, medyo nag-freeze ata ako ng konti. Pasensya na din. Thank you very much, Dean Arinto. I was reminded of BP Cynthia's paradigm shift at the macro level. So this is a paradigm shift at the micro level. The teachers, the educators themselves are really implementing the shift brought about because of the pandemic. So moving forward from higher education, going to basic education, may we call on our last speaker for this webinar. We will have reactors later on. Dr. Dina Ocampo, who is the co-convener of the Education Research Program at UP-CIDS, or Center for Integrative and Development Studies. She's a professor of the University of the Philippines College of Education and a former dean of the same college, where she teaches courses on literacy development, difficulties, and research. From 2013 to 2017, she also served as Undersecretary for Curriculum and Instruction at the Department of Education. She collaborated with academics, government agencies, and non-government organizations that advocate for literacy and books such as Reading Association of the Philippines, the Philippine Dyslexia Foundation for Young People, UNESCO, and the Global Reading Network.
Magandang umaga po sa kanilang lahat. I am Dina Ocampo from the UP College of Education and the Education Research Program here at the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies. I would like to thank colleagues from the Higher Ed program for inviting us to participate in this forum. Indeed, it is a very important forum and we need to discuss the issues that are being raised. For example, the nature of higher ed, what is learning going to be like in the next normal, and of course, at this particular juncture, we talk about continuity from basic to higher education. For today's talk, our outline will be as follows. First, we'll just clear some things, level off with a few definitions, and then I'll discuss a few obstacles and disruptors that has threatened or breached continuity. And then we talk about the gaps that we have observed. And finally, maybe we can discuss a few policies and programs that can bridge continuity from basic to higher education. The definitions that we will level off on are just a couple, but these two definitions, or this definition is important because it is the center of this discussion. No? For example, a lot of us think about continuity in terms of time, that it is something that happens over a long period of time, and indeed that is a section or a part of the definition. But I think the more important part of the definition of continuity is that it is an unbroken and consistent operation of a process. So that part of the definition, I think, is very, very crucial because one, it means that we are thinking about continuity as a process being carried over through an operation, a procedure that must happen consistently. And because it must happen consistently, we assume that it happens over a period of time. This now connotes a path from one point to the other, from the origin to a destination. There is this path. And this path is very important for us to imagine. This path is, for example, from kinder to grade 1, or a path from kinder to grade 6. This path also means that we are assuming certain qualities, that there are reasons why we stay on this path, that this path is worth our time. And so there must be built-in tools and processes that are used to maintain a desired outcome or to attain a target. And finally, continuity increases the likelihood for similar results and outcomes to be attained again or awarded again. This is why, for example, in certain school settings or educational systems, they're very protective of their tradition or very protective of their technologies because they have proven these traditions or technologies to work towards the outcomes that they desire. And participants in these systems value those targets or value those outcomes so that they stay within these systems. Continuity in education and learning is essentially, from a systems point of view, program implementation and access to programs. I think that if program implementation is continuous, then there is likelihood that the objectives of that program will be met by participants or students. If there is continuity of access to the programs, then that means one, more people can participate perhaps, or two, more students are able to avail of the benefits of these programs. Three, the right individuals have access to these programs. And I think these are important points to remember. The reason being, we want people to be in the appropriate program relevant to their needs, their age, their developmental level, and of course, their aspirations. We will also talk about a few obstacles and disruptors. And these are past and present challenges as far as I am concerned. So let's look at the first set. This set of obstacles and disruptors, I've put together because some of them, they have been there for a very long time. Poverty, social injustice, and inequality has been an obstacle to attaining program benefits, to implementing programs, to getting access to programs for decades. And this has been a challenge to everyone in the education sector, whether in government or outside government. It's also very important to remember that poverty is not just affecting the participation of students in school. It also affects their preparation for school. Another important point that we must remember that causes disruption, which is a disruptor, is conflict and war. Anything that threatens the safety of children is something to be very worried about. Natural calamities and disasters are definitely one of the main causes of educational disruption. And another one is urbanization. This might seem a bit strange, but the more quickly a place urbanizes, then the more the need for education in a particular place changes. So that if a place is urbanizing very quickly and the educational system is not changing as fast, or is not producing the graduates that are needed for that change in the city, then that becomes an obstacle to the attainment of the objectives of the community. The second set of disruptors have to do with policy discontinuity, implementation inconsistencies, possibly inadequate coordination among those who are participant in the educational process, and of course a lack of readiness to be able to make changes. For example, a lack of readiness to get into technology. I think that the most threatening of the attainment of program objectives is really implementation inconsistencies, because if we as a nation are looking to excellent basic education, then we must be able to say that education programs in schools for children and the youth are implemented in the same quality level, using quality materials and giving opportunities to all children as they need it. And of course, and it needs no introduction, the COVID-19 pandemic and similar health crisis, these are definitely obstacles and disruptors. Now, because of the recent or the 2 years of COVID-19 threatening our lives, the safety of people and communities, gaps in continuity in education have been noted. We all have experienced it. No? So the impact of obstacles and disruptors, with some focus on senior high school, will be the content of the next few slides. So first, gaps in program implementation have been massive. Whether it is in basic ed or higher education, it has really been massive. We went from classrooms such as this, face-to-face, even if they're full and crowded, there is connection between teacher and student and teachers that we are all used to. And we shifted immediately to these modalities: remote, blended, modular, different ways of delivering the program had to be made immediately. TV, radio, internet, these were all used to the best of the abilities of teachers, of curriculum makers. Everyone involved tried their best to adapt. No? And research has shown us that those who have access to technology and materials have had an edge during this time. And I think that this is a very crucial point, because this is a gap um, that that has caused many children to fall through that crack. To fall, it's not even a crack anymore, it's a gap. To to fall through that gap because they have so little access or limited access, and they cannot partake of whatever the teachers and schools have been developing to the fullest. There are also gaps in access to programs. Um, Based on data from the DepEd, we know that enrollment has fallen from between the years of 2019 to 2020 to the school year 2020 to 2021. And in total of about 2.5 million children. And this is no small number in our country, in any country for that matter. And in particular, and I would like to emphasize that this drop was also seen in senior high school, from a population of 3.192 million children in senior high school, both grades 11 and 12 in 2019. This dropped to 2.89 million in 2020. So we're actually missing about 250,000 students from senior high school. We also have information that there was a drop in the 2020-2021 enrollment in higher education. Unfortunately, there's no information in the website of CHED about 2020-2021, but there have been reports that about 44,000 students did not enroll. The other gap in terms of access to programs that we must all take a look at is actually an existing gap. It's a gap between the number of schools offering senior high school and the number of institutions offering higher education. And so, for example, in total, there are 11,800 senior high schools in the country, but in total, there are only about 2,396 higher education institutions in the entire country. This does not count technical vocational institutions, however, and I believe that those have also a lot of students. But if we are thinking about continuity from basic ed to higher ed, or basic ed to technical ed, then we should be able to map how the graduates or how the schools are near each other or able to cater to the graduates of senior high school. And that, I think, is a crucial aspect of access to programs. When we try to bridge continuity, I think that we must address first things first. First, we must recognize and address pre-existing poverty and inequalities. That's the first thing we need to do, because we cannot jump to a high-tech, fully technological intervention when we aren't able to make sure that students are safe from hunger, that students are free from dangers around them, and that they are living in communities that actually care for them. Another important point is the provision of libraries and multimedia materials and books to communities and schools. Access. And also strengthen infrastructure for access to the internet, technology, and digital tools. Another way is to remember that some disruptors are actually good. For example, technology and digital tools, data use, alternative processes of learning, personalized instruction, differentiated curriculum. These are all innovations that have been present for a very long time. I think that being able to respond and understand these disruptors then would have helped us now. And this is a key point in this discussion. I think that this is a takeaway we must all have so that we don't do it again, that we become more proactive, especially with what options are available. Another important aspect of continuity in education and learning is the understanding of how the levels of education interact or relate with each other. For example, basic education provides a foundation for both technical and higher education. But it also overlaps at a certain level with technical education, and technical education must overlap on many instances with higher education. Another is that there should be policy and program flexibilities. For example, flexible learning options. Um, in basic education, there are in-school, off-school programs, alternative learning systems. And in CHED, there is the expanded tertiary education and equivalency and accreditation program. And in TESDA, there is the recognition of prior knowledge and partnership between DepEd and TESDA, which is called the ALS Education and Skills Training and TVET sa ALS. So these flexible options for learners should be available and very importantly used now when we are constrained for space and time. Another one is an example here is the continuity of curriculum. If programs continue from grade school to college and beyond to technical ed, then you will be able to see the logic of having edukasyon pangtahanan at pangkabuhayan in the grade schools, and later on, continue that until ladderized education where CHED and TESDA actually interface. In this slide, I'd just like to emphasize and respond to the urbanization. If you look at this using data from NEDA, you will find that the number of schools in rural communities, partially urban communities, and urban communities. And we can see here that majority are actually in the cusp of the two. And this means that a lot of our communities are in transition. And so the question is, are our schools also in transition? Are our schools being able to adapt to that? And again, as a matter of program implementation and continuity of access, we need to be able to make our schools responsive to the community. We also need to define public and private partnerships in education and learning. To be able to help families bring their children onwards from basic ed to university or higher ed or technical ed, there has to be voucher programs, education service contracting for alternative education. We have to support private education teachers and students because they've experienced such a massive hit during this pandemic. And finally, it's very important that we spend on education. We need to spend to provide every learner what he or she needs to be able to access these programs so that they can continue. In a study made by colleagues from Cebu, they found that the greatest stumbling block to education during this time of the pandemic is actually the lack of technology, the lack of skills among both teachers and students to use technology, and third, the lack of access to the internet. Fear of the health crisis is also a very important variable. So I'm sorry, I have to cut our discussion very short now. I'm over time as it is. Thank you very much for listening and participating in this forum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dina Ocampo, for providing the perspective from the basic education sector. And before we welcome our reactors, let's watch the Pulso ng Masa video from DZUP on the topic of higher education.
Ano ang mga pagsubok na kinakaharap mo sa pag-aaral at pagtuturo ngayong pandemya?
Napakabagal ng internet connection dito sa Pilipinas.
Kulang sa gadgets. Hindi lang naman ako nag-aaral dito sa amin.
Ang hirap mag-focus at pagsabayan ng trabaho at pag-aaral. Pati may mga kailangan pa asikasuhin sa bahay.
Dahil limitado yung interaksyon, hindi ko tuloy malaman kung epektibo ba akong guro sa kanila.
Ano ang mga hakbang na ginagawa ng mga institusyon ngayong remote learning?
Yung iba, tinitrain yung teachers nila para mag-conduct ng online classes.
I guess nagkakaroon naman na ng health o wellness breaks para sa mga estudyante at guro.
Ang ibang school kasi nagpo-provide ng learning materials eh.
Ano pa ang mga maaaring gawin ng gobyerno para sa mga estudyante, guro at institusyon ng higher learning?
Ano lang naman, sana magkaroon ng maayos na plano para magkaroon na ng ligtas na pagbalik sa eskwelahan for like face-to-face classes.
Pagbibigay ng emotional at mental support para sa amin.
Dapat magpatupad ng mga call to action policies para ma-address ang COVID-19 problems dahil ito ang mas nagpapahirap sa higher education setup ngayon.
Ano-ano ang mga issue sa higher education na dapat bigyang pansin ng mga kakandidato sa darating na eleksyon?
Accessibility sana, kalidad na edukasyon para sa lahat na kahit may hirap kaya makapag-enroll at makapagtapos.
Sana mapataas yung sahod ng bawat guro.
Mapunlad sana natin lahat ng facilities sa lahat ng state university sa bansa.
Higher education in the next normal, harmonizing towards complementarity, continuity, and competitiveness. Bahagi ng #Pilipilunas 2022 webinar series. Hatid sa inyo ng UP Diliman Office of the Chancellor Task Force Nation Building at ng UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, Higher Education, Research and Policy Reform Program.
Thank you, DZUP. So moving on, we would like to call the reactor from the basic education sector, Undersecretary Diosdado M. San Antonio, who is currently the Undersecretary for Curriculum and Instruction of DepEd, and he has been tasked to coordinate the ongoing review of the K-12 curriculum. He pushes for transparency, ethics, and accountability in school governance. In addition, he believes that a strong rewards and recognition system is an effective way to encourage officials and teachers to aim for excellence. Furthermore, he strengthens a strong research culture towards meaningful innovations for learning. He is also one of the 5 Presidential Gawad SES awardees for 2019 for his role in fostering a positive organizational culture in DepEd Calabarzon by advocating for transparent, ethical, and accountable governance, allowing basic educators to implement evidence-based best practices, and for building the competencies of regional officials through its PRINCE, proactive, results-oriented, intelligent, network building, credible, and empowering model. He holds a research PhD in education from the University of Newcastle from the Commonwealth of Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, Undersecretary San Antonio. Sir.
Maraming salamat, Professor Nelson. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. I also was given the guide questions, so I will initially try to provide responses to the guide questions sent to us, then also react to what has been presented by my former boss, Dr. Dina Ocampo. So generally, I feel that indeed higher education in the next normal would really allow a lot of flexible learning opportunities for our youngsters. And the lessons we've learned is essentially the fact that, yes, blending learning opportunities is a valid option for our learners. We really can optimize the use of technology, or although we have acknowledged that there are limitations as cited by the speakers. And in terms of addressing continuity, complementarity, and competitiveness, we feel that yes, we have to intensify collaboration among sectors, stakeholders, and we feel that bayanihan should really, the bayanihan spirit should really be alive in not only in basic education, but even in higher education. And we feel that there's also a need, as highlighted by the speakers, for us to push more aggressively for research initiatives so that we can continue to innovate. And of course, the higher education institutions, NGAs, and higher education organizations can work together if they are open-minded, so that they can listen to what the others would like to contribute in perhaps refining policies. Also, when everyone listens, we expect that mutual trust would be established. And as far as the Department of Education is concerned, for the K-12 program, we are excited about the fact that the Teacher Education Council law is about to be amended. I have heard that the Senate has ratified the reconciled versions of the tech law amendment. Of course, I personally feel that all of us, not only the basic educators, should be also mindful of the need for the learners to be engaged, to have the desire to learn, to aspire to develop more skills. And we understand that indeed the PQF, as cited by the speakers, would be very useful in guiding us, educators, and also even the learners on how they can proceed so that they can attain higher level of professional qualification. The reality that micro-learning is also possible is something that I think has to be strengthened. And as mentioned by Yusek Dina, there's really a need to make sure that access is enhanced. I always share with people that I'm an example of someone who comes from a very poor family who ended up being able to improve my socioeconomic status because of a formal degree. I know that in the next normal, it's not about the degrees, but it's about what we all know. But I feel that if we can really strengthen the desire for every youngster to be more focused on preparing himself or herself to pursue a life of his choice in the future, and if the existing systems, the disruptors, and those that have been identified as obstacles by Yusek Dina, Dr. Dina, could be addressed, I feel that we will create Filipinos who will really be very productive and who will be assets in nation building. We agree that indeed the poverty is a serious hindrance. So there's really a need for us to work together so that the government can continue to expand what we are offering now, so that even children coming from poor families are able to benefit from higher education. I think it was highlighted by many of the speakers that this is one constraint, and I just am so fortunate that I am able to claim that I was able to escape poverty. I'm the eldest in a family of 9 children, and my mother just sold fresh fish in the neighborhood when I was attending college. And in fact, I had to take a loan from my own aunt so that I could finish my college education. But what I'm saying is, I think what has to be done is really to provide more mechanisms so that children coming from poor families who have potentials to become assets of society are given the chance. So, and they are not constrained from achieving their goals, personal and professional goals, on account of material, economic difficulties. So yes, I fully believe that the current initiatives would be very helpful in making sure that the higher education sector is able to continue to build youngsters ready for the VUCA world. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. God bless.
Thank you very much, Yusek San Antonio. Indeed, actually, the bridge between the resources and our students who are marred in the structural problems of poverty would be the big B, the bureaucracy. And we're thankful that USEC San Antonio is in DepEd na nandun talaga yung commitment, no, to see this through. So thank you very much, USEC San Antonio. So moving on, may we call on our second reactor, the Executive Director of the National Institute for Technical Education and Skills Development of TESDA, Executive Director David Bungalion. ED Bungalion is a licensed chemical engineer and an experienced textbook trainer, administrator, and director. He anchored his professional career in technical education and skills development. As the Executive Director of NIT ESD of TESDA, he is tasked to help reposition technical vocational education, or TVET, in the context of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and promote its importance as a critical sector for education, social, and economic development. So without further ado, ED Bungalion, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nelson. I thought I am excused from my my role here, but anyway, that is usually expected. Technical problem. Well, before everything else, I would like to share TESDA's greetings to Chairperson Edicio De La Torre, our former Director General at TESDA, sir, and of course to USEC Diosdado San Antonio. We usually call him actually USEC Dad, who is also a current board member of the TESDA board. And of course to the other fellow reactant, who is Dean Christian Bustamante of San Beda. The speakers who just shared their insights, and also to the participants, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Isang masiglang TESDA para sa inyo. Well, I cannot agree more with the speakers. First is because they are all educators from the prestigious university, the University of the Philippines, who is actually our pride in the global community of education. So they've shared their insights, and of course, my reaction will just be integrated in these reactions that I will be sharing. So. But one thing in common, I think, is we are in agreement that we have been disrupted by COVID-19, and the impact to education, economic, and to the health sector is worse. It has affected our way of life. But while we are preparing, or where we are, resolving concerns brought by the pandemic, we must also be concerned with another pandemic, and with another disruption that is on our way, and this is now the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Because this will really indeed bring us to what Dr. Arento shared a while ago, the VUCA world. Well, the continuing advancement of technology is unstoppable. We can see here the development, an example is the cell phone. And the development of, in terms of the learning deliveries, the technology-driven learning delivery gadgets. However, on a positive note, I agree with what Dr. Bautista shared when she said that COVID-19 catalyzes our shift or our change to the new normal. And yes, it is indeed accelerating our preparations to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And this is one thing that our private and public sector must be one with, putting our experience in order for us, again, not to be, quote, unprepared when we are in that revolution, Fourth Industrial Revolution stage. So what lessons have we drawn from the pandemic that inform higher education policies and programs in the next normal? Let me just respond to this question in the context of technical vocational education. But let me first share that the technical vocational education is guided by the National Technical Education Skills Development Plan. And there are two drivers here. we have what we call the two-pronged strategies, which is the Tibet for global competitiveness and workforce readiness through the delivery of higher level Tibet programs and global referencing. And the other one is the Tibet for social equity and poverty reduction through the delivery of competency-based training or vocational training programs and livelihood programs that is in convergence with the other private and public sectors, or shall we say now, an implementation following the whole of nation approach. In the delivery of Tibet, we have been in the development, shall I say, and the delivery of technical vocational education training. We have been competency-based with this. In terms of competency standards, the competency standards for Tibet programs are developed with industry partners. The competency-based curriculum are developed based on the competency standards. And of course, the delivery is competency-based training, including the development of competency assessment instrument towards certification of our Tibet graduates and workers. While we are in this, we are doing, shall I say, doing good with this one. The planning and preparation, we have been planning and preparing also for the fourth industrial revolution since 2019. This is also in response to the Republic Act 11293 or the Philippine Innovation Act that brought us to develop the Philippine Tibet 4.0 framework, okay, in response to the challenge of the fourth industrial revolution. But these were all disrupted when COVID-19 came. We were caught, actually we can say that we were caught unprepared, we were caught with time. And this freezes the delivery of Tibet for almost 3 months, actually. 3 months. But in response, we have developed what we call the operational plan Tibet for the new normal, where the flexible learning delivery system was formulated in view of or considering the readiness of our technical vocational institutions, the capacity of learners, and the capability of our faculty. And this leads to the different learning modes like the online learning delivery mode, the blended, which by definition is face-to-face and online combination, and the hybrid distance learning, which is being implemented with the use of competency-based training, competency-based learning materials. Okay. So these are actually implemented in combinations, but of course, this cannot be implemented without capacitating our trainers. So the trainers at that time, we rushed actually a program what we call the Facilitate e-learning session and multiplied this program all over the country to facilitate Tibet learning facilitators. So with this is the development of e-learning materials, so that enabled them to deliver the blended learning and the online component, learning component. The other one is we have it together in collaboration with the DICT and the Amazon Web Solution. We strengthen the Test the Online program that at least help. This is a national platform, web-based platform and cloud anchored, that has actually provided the opportunity for those students that are not able to go to the classroom due to the quarantines through these massive open online courses. So this Test the Online program is also provided, or this is being used as a platform for facilitated courses of the Test technology institutions. And this was served the students, the displaced workers, and the OFWs. As a matter of fact, we have served about more than 1 million. More than 1 million from that 9 months quarantine period. So what were the lessons learned? Okay, as far as Tibet is concerned, we can say that Tibet must not be, stiff in terms of policy and delivery. It must be agile, considering, that we have learned that delivery must be technology driven. Okay, we cannot escape the influence of technology, and it must be flexible. Flexible in the sense that we have to consider also the learner's characteristics and then adapt our learning delivery to this learner's characteristics. And it must be scalable. So it must be, the programs must be demand driven. We can no longer afford to, just to recycle old programs. It must always be supply driven, demand driven rather than supply driven. Tibet also must not be isolated in implementation. Okay, so it must be strong in partnership with the industry to maintain relevance and to ensure that it is being updated, because we all know that the Tibet is the interface between education and the world of work, and it must not be isolated in the sense that it must also serve. It must be inclusive. It must serve the displaced workers, the OFWs, and for their upskilling, retooling, in order for them to be able to land again in a job that is now being offered by the new normal. There must be continuous improvement and the development in terms of the Tibet program. This is to keep pace with the development and sustain the implementation amidst disruption. We have learned from the COVID-19 that we should always be prepared. There is that saying that, we prepared with technology. Well, there was that question raised whether in the fourth industrial revolution, if in the fourth industrial revolution, our teachers or trainers will be replaced by robots, considering that actually the third industrial revolution is robotics already. The fourth industrial revolution, is more on digitalized processes. The answer of industry is not actually, but even in the education sector, it will not actually. That is a misconception. Teachers or learning facilitators who can adapt to technology or digital technology will be retained, and teachers who cannot adapt to technology-driven learning may be replaced, not by robots, but by teachers who have this capability and capacities. The other lesson learned that we got from here is we have to continue investing to Tibet or to learning requirements. This was also emphasized by Dr. Ocampo when she said that we have to spend or invest to education. This is for the private and the public sector or government. So what would be the shape? The second question is, what would be the shape and form of Philippine higher education in the next normal? I took note some of the highlights when Dr. Ocampo said that we have to strengthen basic education as the foundation in order to provide quality inputs to technical education and higher education. I agree also with Dr. Arinto when he said that learning in the next normal should be characterized by imaginative approaches. And I like very much what she mentioned when she said that the evaluation of learners must be gradeless learning. Okay, and I think that's a good mindset. Well, of course, in Tibet we are competency based, so it's not really numerical evaluation, but it's more on the learning outcome evaluation, and it is more on adjectival grading. And when we say it's competency based, actually a 90% is not a passing mark, because all the learning outcomes must be satisfied given the requirement on the skills, knowledge, and attitude demonstrated by a learner. Okay. For Tibet, we would like to see a Tibet that is really industry driven, okay? In order that we'll be able to produce or to provide technologists, technicians, skilled workers required by the world of work. Because at the end, that is the evaluation of success of a TVET program. We are also now introducing the area-based demand-driven TVET, where the skills prioritization must be anchored on the need of the different economic need of the different regions. Okay. We have already started this one, and we hope that we will continue to pursue this one until it's a high level of implementation. This is one way of facilitating or helping in the economic development of the different regions. In terms of technology support, TVET, we want to see a TVET that is technology driven. This is to, again, as I mentioned earlier, to sustain relevance and continuity. When we say technology, it must be digitally driven. The equipment must be industry simulated and become ambitious that instead of because procuring, we cannot compete with industry, we cannot keep pace with the shift, the advancing technology used being the industry, but just to be economical or just to at least relate with become relevant to this change in the technology by the industry. We want to see our learning equipment simulate we have some virtual realities or equipment that simulates the real equipment in the industry. Okay. And we want also a TVET that is in terms of the learning delivery, there must be a shift. I think Dr. Bautista mentioned this earlier, that there must be a shift from teaching to learning. Teachers or the trainers must not be doing the same way as they did in the old normal, but they have to shift to become learning facilitators. As we said, we now have a different characteristic or behavior of learners, and we cannot use old solutions with new situations. And that is one. And the trainers, one thing more is the trainers must be developed as 21st century trainers. In terms of the curriculum, we are working on strengthening STEM in the TVET curriculum, and also strengthening or emphasizing the 21st century academically and also becoming applied in the different practical activities of learning. And we are now actually working on the program development and micro credentialing, and I think this was also elaborated by Dr. Arinto a while ago. Okay, and this is one of I've just read one of a global paper which says that higher education must recognize this micro credentialing because industry and so with the learners actually are into it. And we want a TVET that is also, we would like to strengthen the enterprise-based, particularly we have now the dual training system. We have even a law for the dual training system, but the problem is in the implementation. There is a need for industry to, to adapt or to appreciate dual training system. Now, on the third question on complementarity, continuity and quality in the education sector. Okay. Well, as far as complementarity is concerned, we all know that our education system is trifocalized. We have the basic education for DepEd, we have BET for TESDA, and higher education supervised by CHED. Okay, and we develop our own policies. I don't know if the word silos is concerned is a term, but we develop independently. But I think we have now, in order for us to align synchronized policies, we support the establishment and strengthening of the National Education Council as the platform for aligning policies, synchronizing policies, or as a platform for discussion all towards a seamless education policy. I think partnership and linkaging also must be pursued. Industry and academe, or tertiary education, technical education with higher education, and so with the basic education. And on the part of Tibet, this is one thing that we have again to strengthen the partnership and linkaging with industry, because if we mean to provide an standards that is accepted in the world of work and a curriculum that is relevant with the labor market and a program that would now address the supply, the mismatch of supply and demand, then I think that must be pursued. Collaborative planning, implementation, evaluation must also be engaged with relevant government agencies. We have, for example, the DTI is now working on the Philippine Skills Framework, and that would be a very good framework, a very good platform to identify programs, because these are actually contributed again and developed with the industry. As to the continuity,
I think we are running out of time, but some of those actually can be brought up during the Q&A. So these are very important points, coming from TESDA. And I know TESDA has been very exemplary during the pandemic, yung online provision and TESDA. But siguro to dovetail with what an next reactor would also like to point out, the former Director General of TESDA, and then maybe meeting towards the end dito sa ating open forum. So thank you very much, Edie Mungalion, for the perspective, very comprehensive perspective on TESDA. And moving forward, may we call on the chairperson of the Education for Life Foundation and the president of the Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement, chairperson of the Global Mindanao Polytechnic Incorporated, and the National Advisory Council National Tibet Trainers Academy of TESDA, eminent fellow of the Development Academy of the Philippines and faculty of the Galing Fuok Academy. So, and Board of Trustees member of the Universidad de Manila. Is committed to adult education and lifelong learning, and is most interested in promoting innovation and collaboration between formal learning systems and ALS. Without further ado, Chairperson Edicio de la Torre. Sir?
Thank you, and I know we are constrained for time, so I'll try to keep my comments succinct. First of all, thank you for this initiative, and hearing the speakers and the reactors, it's clear that I think we have a general consensus. Things are changing. We have to change, and we have very many ideas about flexibility, blended, and all that. So I like to focus my attention on maybe 3 points which I call more a strategy issue. Maybe I'm the oldest in the room. I'm 78 years old. Thinking now, what more can I say that is not just an idea, but maybe we can push the process of adaptation and innovation forward. I'd like to start with the first premise. It's a word, it's a concept from more social change literature that talks of combined and uneven development. I like to caution against a possible either linear conception of this change, no? So from agriculture to industry, industry 1 to industry 4, and then urbanization as the urban industrial, and then knowledge creative economy, and the rural kind of residual the sooner it goes. But I think what is important to realize is, first of all, I think what Dina has mentioned, not just inequality, but the unevenness, no? The unevenness, not only of resources, but changes, no? And different, let's call it, initial endowments, plus, yeah, some areas are still subject to armed struggle, some are relatively peaceful. What this means is that the changes and the innovations we want to promote and to push, especially in the higher education system, to take into account this combined and uneven character. So definitely there will be innovations at the cutting edge level, from robotics, AI, creative industry, and there you have partnerships between higher education institutions, between leading corporations that invest in quality as their competitive advantage and not just costs, and government agencies that can provide appropriate support and develop appropriate regulations for that. I think that's clearly one area. No? Then there's another area which is somewhere in between. No? I think that Dave is more conscious of that, and us. There you talk of not just doctoral, breakthrough research, masteral. You have a lot of the bachelor, this in between, whole issue on the PQF level 6. That is another issue because that's the core of the workforce. No matter how much we want, lots of innovative, cutting edge leaders and learners and teachers, we do have a majority that will still have to the basic not just maintenance and replenishment, but maintaining whatever competitive role they we still have. And then you have a section that is initially seen as left behind, but then, and the second point I want to raise, in 2021, the UN DESA, the Division on Economic and Social Affairs, issued what I thought was an interesting report that has a title. It says, Reconsidering Rural Development to Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And their whole point, this is not just for poverty, because a lot of people are poor, they are in the rural areas, and inequality. It's also this new vision of development. What kind of development do we want? And while there are ideas about green development, green industrial, green urban development, their point is, in the rural, the relationship between natural capital and human capital is still closest, and although under threat, no? Deforestation, soil erosion, things like that. So their point is, there must be, in addition to this new drive, no, for a better, more humane, less congested urban, that there should be a rethinking and reconceptualization. They call either in situ urbanization or new townships, which is not simply agriculture. There's not only also simply infrastructure, definitely a very strong element of technology, especially digital, but also precisely the educational and other institutions, which will make sure, so your whole point about Dina, that even at basic education, the distribution is moving towards the urban and the peri-urban, lalo na higher education. If there are no centers, that can attract, or retain, combination of from urban to rural or retain, then the possibilities of a new thinking on rural development as the other leg of balanced or combined urban-rural development will not be accomplished. So that's the first point I want to raise, because I feel, like say, well, UP, the UP system, of course, has also regional and all, but I think the leadership of UP with CHED in linking SUCs and willing private HEI, the opportunity, not just this, but the opportunities there would be one of the areas where we can make breakthrough. For example, I was thinking just a simple thing. Because of the pandemic, of course, all of us wonder if we are not hit, how can we improve our immune system? How can we strengthen it? And in addition to vitamin C plus zinc and lagundi, of course, Dr. Dairit and the DOST have already done 2 studies from Santa Rosa and Valenzuela that VCO, the proper dose, can really hasten the recovery from COVID. But that, and there, in relation to that, there is a definitely global market. There are new, bigger, innovative corporations from Franklin Baker to Peter Paul to Axellum and all that, who are addressing these new coconut products for the world market and not just the old crude coconut oil. And luckily, although it took super long, supposedly sometime this year, with the Coconut in the Farmers and Industry Development Plan being approved, the Cocoa Levy Fund will be released. There is now this area that is not just for basic improving of productivity of farmers. This a combination of research, like I was told, we have very few oleochemical engineers. And more important, Dave, okay, if you want to promote the integration of the big with the medium and the small, where are the technicians and the technologies and all that? There are many possibilities for coordination of higher and technical education in a sector that has possibilities for growth, that has possibilities for equity, but more important, will demand higher technical education. And more important, there will be funding support for it. But this would mean, and I would like to apply that, and that's the third point, 2 things. The ideas about innovation and even initial practices internationally and even some locally about different modes of delivery, emphasis on learning, blended learning, and the need also for more appropriate assessment and certification systems has been well made. But I was thinking this is an area that we could apply, like who is the engineer at that level, who is the technician, and what are the requirements. So I'm saying that that is one. The other, by the way, which I have been persuaded during this pandemic by the former BIFAR director, Asis Perez, when you talk rural development, you only talk land-based. Don't you realize that the Philippines is a maritime and archipelagic nation? Bigger areas for marine and bigger resources there than land-based. But again, where are the now? Well, there are some corporations other than the artisanal fisher folk and all. But there's a lot of possibilities, not only for marine engineering, shipbuilding and all that, but also processing. And what I'm saying is the principle that I remember the late Malu Ronila telling me this. Ed, when you talk of philosophy of education and directions for that, you make sure that it is located within the philosophy of development that it is supposed to serve. And so the whole idea is, what is sustainable and equitable development that we are thinking of in the Philippines that has been accelerated by this pandemic and the disruption and rebalancing and reorganization of the global system of which we are a part, and not just a minor part. We could be in significant areas major participants, and to be able to take advantage of that, we need what you have mentioned already. We need collaboration of higher education institutions, public and private, higher and technical, and the two together with the industry sector. I would like to add, and this is the third, well, as I told you, as a senior citizen, but an activist all my life. I see education in the context also of what kind of changes are possible, especially in the public sector. No? You see, NGOs and CSOs traditionally have been, kind of laboratories for innovation. But for a long, long while, our method was we tended to get foreign funding, which would support us. We were flexible, but we did not seriously, for sustainability, engage partnership both with formal educational institutions, especially SUCs, and NGOs and national government agencies. And recently, my thinking has been that there are so many younger people, professionals, who are employed in these institutions who are looking for ways to partner with innovations in the community among social activists. But we have not been able to establish that. No? Why is it important? Because especially I was thinking, PRRM has a few staff, but there are so many former staff who are now actually DRR officers, even planning development officers of areas and all that. We can offer them innovative courses, but normally, especially for government, they want formal credentials. So they might not want grades, but they want certificates, preferably degrees. So my last point here really is that other than innovative methods and support, not just in terms of policy, but resources, I think what we need to work on is as important as the others is the system of accreditation and certification. Just mentioning MOOC, you know that MOOC is free. But when you want to get the certificate, you pay. It's turning out that the higher education institutions and higher education authorities, our main power is recognition, not just the money and the policies, but the system of recognition. And that is not something to be kind of poo-pooed away, because we are not just individuals who will rely on our self-recognition, our self-confidence, but we are living in a society where social recognition, market recognition, and formal recognition by institutions matter, not just for our own, but also for our relevance. So those are some of the initial ideas. Maybe one last practical challenge. With all this talk about so many materials available, maybe UP and CHED and different SUCs, could you not collaborate to produce rapidly in this next year, really a series of 1 hour instructional videos that are based on broad curriculum and maybe some learning materials. Maybe the UP Open University can take I don't know, but I was just thinking, what would have an immediate impact, for example, with the community leaders, especially their children whom I work with and who cannot enter the university, but who would want higher education and who would want that recognized, subject to an appropriate assessment and certification process jointly with CIDS and TESDA. This might be some possibilities that I hope can be practical steps forward from this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson De La Torre, for those insights. Moving forward, last but not least, from the private tertiary education sector, Dr. Christian Brian S. Bustamante, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences of San Beda University and the Vice Chair of the Commission on Tertiary Education of the Philippine Accrediting Association of Schools, Colleges, and University. He is also the Director in Quality Assurance of San Beda University and an expert in political theory and philosophy in the same newly minted university. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Bustamante. Sir.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Based on the insights and ideas shared to us by our speakers, I was able to pick or develop 6 points, and allow me to explain briefly these 6 points. So first, education is social. that one of the things that we learned during this pandemic is that education in the Philippines is not equal. No, it is not equal. Yes, we want education to be inclusive. We want education to be accessible, but as what mentioned a while ago, no, because of poverty, social injustices, and inequality, it is manifested, no, during the pandemic that education in the Philippines is not equal. And one of the reasons why it is not equal is because those students who have access to technology were the ones who have access to learning. Okay, that is why number two, which is related to number one, no, in order to close this gap in learning brought about by pandemic and other disruptions, no, in the future, the government must invest a lot in technology as well as in connectivity. Okay, we are talking about innovation. We were talking about new approaches in learning. We're talking about the use of technology. No, however, we also, as what mentioned a while ago by one of the speakers, we have to accept the reality. No, that in the Philippines there are many people, students who are poor. In the Philippines, there is still the problem of inequality and poverty. Inequality is, affected or influenced a lot learning because due to poverty and inequality, many students do not have access to technology, and also they have poor connectivity, and this affected learning or in education. Thirdly, government agencies, when it comes to learning and curriculum innovation, government agencies such as CHED, DepEd, TESDA, and PRC must sit down together and they must discuss, about this learning and curriculum innovation, particularly on our part in the private sector, particularly on the programs, no, that have board examinations. No. This is one of the reasons why we are one of the reasons why we do not want immediately to adopt innovative ways in teaching is because of the board examination. Number four, HEIs nowadays must have learning continuity plan. No, it was mentioned a while ago that disruptions can be in a form of technology or natural disaster, and it was also mentioned a while ago that aside from this pandemic, no, um, one of the factors or one of the reasons that can cause disruption in the future is climate change. And we learn a lot, no, from this pandemic that learning should never be disrupted. That is why HEIs, no, must have, learning continuity plan, no, in order for the students, no, to continue learning, no, even in the different even in normal, both in normal as well as in abnormal situations. Okay, number five, faculty training, no. So there must be a shift, no, in on there must be a paradigm shift on learning. The teachers must be trained and must be prepared, no, to handle learning, no, both to handle blended learning, to handle flip learning, mixed mode learning. Okay, and also teachers must also be trained or be prepared, no, to handle learning or teaching, particularly in times of pandemic. Okay, and teachers must also be trained, no, to continuously adapt, no, to curricular innovation. Okay, and to continuously also adapt the different approaches, no, creative approaches in teaching and learning. Okay, particularly the research-based view, no, of learning. Okay, and number six, I think this is for me this is the shape of education, higher education. One of the characteristics rather of higher education in new normal, that we have to focus a lot authentic assessment as well as on authentic learning. Okay, and one of the things that we have learned, no, in this pandemic is that we have to allow students, no, to explore, discuss, and meaningfully construct concepts, no, and relationships, no, in contexts that involve real world problems and projects that are relevant to them. Okay, not only relevant to the teachers but also relevant to them. And also when it comes to authentic assessment, we have to also have a paradigm shift in assessment wherein students must be able to apply what they have learned in real scenarios, okay, or what students must apply what they have learned in real life cases. Okay, so that's all for on my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bustamante. And at this juncture, we would like to now open the floor for questions. Again, please post your questions on the Google form that was shared by the Secretariat in the chat box. So we have here some questions that were actually also posted in the link. To Dr. Ocampo / everyone, what are your opinions on the need for coordinated efforts by BEIs and HEIs to provide transition programs for students moving from senior high school to college? Are there existing mechanisms for this, especially in terms of literacy skills?
Hello, salamat sa tanong. I answered actually dun sa Q&A ng ating forum, but very quickly I'll just summarize the answer I wrote there. I think that what we need to do is to invest in a lot of instructional design and instructional materials development so that these materials can be designed in response to learner contexts and learner capacities. Learners can be provided self-assessment materials, which is nothing new to TESDA at all. No? And based on results or the guidance of the results of self-assessment, they can now select bridging modules or bridging Moocs or bridging materials, whatever. There has to be a variety of available bridge materials that can now help them bridge from outcomes or learning from basic ed and bridge towards those that are required for higher ed. Diba? And because there are so many points of connection in curriculum, then that means a lot of materials need to be made available. I think that is the most urgent and the most concrete way to do the transitions. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Any response? I surmise that some of the questions were already answered in the Q&A. So any questions from the audience? Direct from the live question from the audience, if there are questions. So the next question, none so far.
Nelson, just a comment.
Yes.
Comment.
Bautista, yes, please.
So our presentations actually talk about the next normal, right? The gradeless possibly is an option in the next normal. So it is really part of a whole conversation and a lot of discussions. So I just want to just put our discussion in context, and then maybe for Ed, there are, and maybe Pat can discuss, is there a lot UP has already shared, or at least maybe people don't know, many of the open source materials that it has produced. And and we are also moving into micro-credentialings. So that is also our way. I'm struck by what Dina said earlier. Totoo, ang laki ng discrepancy ng number of senior high schools and college, diba? So how do we now reach as many when our resources are really very, very limited and the nature of the institution as of now? So that's the reason why we're also opening up a bit in terms of the lifelong learning and exit and programs that will be available to students, diba? That they can act, if you're able to reach more students with Moocs, for instance, then they can credential. I mean, so they can get their certifications at some point and get into the more formal system. So that's it. For instance, our associate degrees, we now have associate in arts degrees for those, for instance, in music, and then they go to the music business in the music industry. They come back, but some of them go to the ladderized. Ito yung ladderization eh. They go to the ladderized program and they can get a formal degree. So parang yan, just as a quick note.
Yes, I would like
yes,
to...
Chairperson De La Torre.
Yes, Ed,
please.
Chairperson. Anyway, I just want to note that, once every 12 years, the UN education system holds what they call Confintea, the International Conference on Adult Learning and Education. And this year, I thought it would be held later in November, but they advanced it to June. Relevant to that, because the question when they asked the Philippines, what are you doing? Basically, those who were invited from the government basically discussed, ALS, which is partly adult learning education, really more for basic education, and then had something on TESDA. But there was really nothing, no real, even a discussion on ETIAP, but more important, the collaboration, because your whole point about continuity is there are certain strands that are not principally institution-based, but should be related to the institution, whether it's ALS in basic education, recognition of prior learning in TESDA, or industry-based certification, and later, various forms of partnership between formal higher education, including their open university system, and learners, either senior high school graduates or technical education graduates, or just professionals wanting to achieve additional credentials. I think this is one area of collaboration. You're not touching as such the different institutions, but you're finding ways of tapping, as I mentioned earlier, their power of credentialing, but also of having resources, faculty, curricula, learning materials. Maybe we should explore such collaboration, including expanding and improving the quality of open distance learning, which it's been there for a long while already, but maybe we should, including also, I think, with technical education, and also with others who might not have their formal open distance learning system, but could collaborate, because given the fact that they cannot re-enroll in the institution. I think that's an area, there's a need, but there are also opportunities already in place. We already have policies. Maybe the question now is how to advocate, either can that be supported also by the TES? And thirdly, how do we now develop the assessment and certification that need would be one summary? That's where the micro and accumulation, stacking of credentials will come in. I'd like to pose that as one actionable exploration, maybe as a follow-up discussion among interested parties, including, by the way, certain corporations who will be interested. That's HRDs, because they don't want to wait. I mean, their own people, they don't want them off the work for so long just to get their form degree. Still in many HR policies.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson De La Torre. I think if we look at the discussion, we're running out of time. All of this shifting shift in paradigm, then a shift at the micro level, as pointed out by Dr. Arinto, and the assessments, micro-credentialing, multiple pathways. I think there's a good question here by Dr. Leo Lampay on instructional design experts, the guys actually who will shift this in actuality on the ground. And do we have enough of these experts in the Philippines? And is it a specialization that has to be developed more in graduate school, or even maybe not in grad school, but even in the undergraduate level? And do we have the human resource? Yes, Dr. Dean Arinto.
Yeah, there are many questions on the grade listing, but also this one first, what you just said. My first answer, of course, is that one important role of teachers is really to design learning, design for learning. And I think that's prior to the pandemic, when we all had to shift to remote learning, that was not very obvious even to the teachers themselves. So because, there are many roles that teachers have, right? And one of them is the easiest one, and always the go-to role, is to deliver the content. That's really the poorest use, I think, of teacher time, to be delivering content when you could very well be studying it in some form, right? Even a pre-recorded lecture from the teacher. And what we really need the teachers to be doing is to be thinking about what learning activities to design, and in order that students will benefit the most from these available resources, and how to help learners make connections. So that's one. Teachers are supposed to be designing learning. But of course, in addition to that, you have people who can specialize in it. And part of that is given precisely the fact that we don't have a dearth of content. We have a lot of content. The problem really is organizing this content into something that people can learn from. So it's really wrapping around them, for example, and designing the learning activities, as I said, the guides that students need. So that's my answer to that. With regard to the questions on gradeless, I want to just say it na lang because there's several here. Well, yeah, first of all, if you UP had that experience when we had to shift suddenly in the second semester, right, when the pandemic broke out, and the decision was to adopt a pass or fail system, and that would have been really actually straightforward, except that it triggered a lot of anxiety among a lot of people, including this idea that our students might need grades for various reasons, like their scholarships, child requirements, DOST scholarship requirements, and such. So meron tayong ganong issue, and syempre kailangan talaga yan. Ang feeling ko, within an institution, you can do it, or even within programs, but you also have to forget that, you also have to remember, that in fact, what you can look at is not so much going gradeless altogether as simply what is the term for it? It's not disaggregating, it's untangling, okay? Untangling summative, unpacking, summative, evaluative assessment from the formative learning that should be taking place, and how that summative part can be done externally, actually, di ba? I mean, if you're interested in the final grade of people, let them first develop their competencies without having to worry about what their grades are, developing their love of learning and deep engagement. And then if you need to test their competencies, as has been pointed out already by Testa, for example, it's not a grade, it's 100%. You're not interested in 90. For a driver, for example, you're interested in 100% can drive safely and whatever. So yun, mga external assessments yun, di ba? So that's what your external bodies ought to do. So yeah, so there's that. That's one thing to think about, I guess.
Thank you, Dean Arinto. There's this question from an anonymous attendee. Very important, I think. How can, especially those who can't sit in front of a gadget, and or those parents or guardians who can't teach the child. So, totoo nga naman, maraming ganitong situation.
Nelson,
Maybe from
Nelson,
From-
can you repeat the question because you were not, you had an
how can
unstable
we make
internet.
this new learning inclusive? So inclusivity, because there are students with special needs and with parents or guardians who can guide the child in the learning process. Maybe because they themselves also do not have the
Hello.
Okay, Dina,
This was
answer
one
na
of
lang.
the things that we talked about when the College of Education conducted a webinar series on learning continuity and educational resilience. No? And one of those issues that we paid attention to had to do with special needs children. And of course, families that are challenged because there are no adults in the home who may be able to provide support. Our answer to that, and it continues to be my answer to this kind of question, is that we need to understand contexts of learners and develop programs for those learners. So it cannot be one size fits all kind of material or process. It has to be responsive to what the learners are showing. So the first thing for me is really to understand who those learners are. And that has to be granular. It cannot come top down. It's really granular. So people, schools, families should have some way of finding these. I don't want to call it categories, but they are categories, no? Categories of learners, capacities and available technologies. And that's the first place to start because it's scary, parang parents who cannot read, how they're going to teach their grade 1 children how to read. It's scary, but they're not everyone, diba? So interventions for families with that situation must be created. And then interventions for families that don't have that situation must also be created. So we need to, the best way I think to say it is that we need to break up the problem in solvable chunks. Diba? And these solvable chunks have instructional and learning solutions.
May we hear from Yusek San Antonio?
Thank you. In addition to what
sagutin ni Yusek, is the
hello?
Ed at higher ed, no?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yes,
addition
yes,
to
Yusek.
what Ma'am Dina has mentioned, in the current context, the Department of Education has actually allowed the hiring of learning support aides for families whose parents are not capable of extending academic support to their children. Of course, we also made sure that the learning resources for those kind of children with additional needs are also adjusted. So just like what Yusek Dina has mentioned, we make sure that the response is addressing the specific need of the learner. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek. How about there's another question on the ways to compare assessment results from basic ed and higher ed. Would this be useful for designing transition programs? Maybe they're referring to exams, or is it assessment at the? I think Yusek San Antonio wanted to respond to this, and maybe for higher ed, considering regional comparison, BP Scenes, Bautista. We'll have Yusek San Antonio very briefly, sir.
As is known to most of us, we do the national achievement test, and there's even a basic education exit assessment that we administer for our senior high school learners. I understand that ideally there should just be one examination perhaps that will be administered for the completers of the whole K-12 program that may also be used by universities in identifying their future students. But this is something that is not yet in place, and this could be very tricky, knowing that such an issue is something that will always have, strong advocates, but there would also be certain people who would say we cannot do that. But I really feel that if we can integrate the final assessment at the end of the K-12 program with the assessment that the universities need for them to, identify their students, I feel that that would be more efficient and really a better way of ensuring that there's a seamless, effort to assess what our learners have learned from us and what perhaps the learners would need in terms of the support the higher education institutions would offer their learners when they join you as your students. Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you,
I get,
Yusek San Antonio. Yes,
I get there have been efforts in the past, but like Yusek San Antonio mentioned, mahirap talaga eh. There were efforts to actually have from the assessments in basic education, and then maybe that, and then eventually even the college admissions test would just be the same, diba? And then schools just look at the tests and then figure out what they would like from the test. But hindi, kasi we have admission tests, diba? I mean, admission tests, and they are paid for. So in a sense, they're also sources of income for some of the schools. So that has not worked out very well. But other countries actually have such a system, diba? And it's just harder for us. But maybe I just wanted to say something. I like to stress the fact that there's no one size fits all talaga. And I'd like to stress the granular part of it. Even in higher ed, when the pandemic struck, not all our students, of course, our students, many of them have no access, diba? So we had to, for those students, we had to print out everything. I mean, whatever is supposed to be in the course pack and deliver to them. But that doesn't mean we stop, diba? We had rules about synchronous sessions, online sessions. They cannot be required for everyone because some cannot really access. But whatever recording there is will be shared, diba? So those are we have to also take care of specific needs, but at the same time we also have to continue. So how to continue and be granular without one size fits all policies, I think is really, it's really the way in a disruptive future. Talagang maraming areas for decision making on the part of those on the ground. Yeah.
Thank you, VP Bautista. Last point for now, because we are running out of time. I'd just like to ask very briefly, Dr. Bustamante, as to how PACOCOA, especially because you're from PACOCOA, is transitioning its standards also.
I
Because
am from
supposedly
PASCO.
they're the ones. PASCO. Sorry. Yeah, PASCO. Yeah, PACOCOA is the other one. Sorry. PASCO. Yes.
Actually, PASCO for this year started the virtual accreditation, for higher education. Okay, and we have also revised our instrument, our evaluation instrument, to fit also the changes, in education or in learning brought about by this pandemic. For example, we have also created a tool, that we are using in evaluating online classes, both synchronous as well as synchronous. Okay, and we also revised also the instrument, that we are using in accreditation. So it is more on, we emphasize more on the narrative reporting of the school of what they are doing, rather than a quantitative report, or assessment of their previous performances.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bustamante. Is that the same also, sir? Last point from TESDA, ED Mongolian. Is that the same also for regulation in TVIs, especially private TVIs?
Yeah, usually in terms of regulation, it is the program that is being regulated by for the technical vocational institutions. But in terms of recognizing their organizational excellence and quality management, we have also the the program on the systems for Tibet accreditation and recognition. We call it STAR. And we have also the APAC, the Asian Pacific Accreditation Certification and ISO certification for our institutions. And these are the regulatory functions. Now, in terms of implementing it, given the quarantines, yes, we are working also on a portfolio and online submission of these requirements, but we still require physical inspection of these evidences that they have submitted. So that's how we are doing it. Thank you.
So we are really adjusting, and we are also compelled, no? Wala talaga tayong choice but to adjust, no? Given the circumstances, health reasons, and of course the competition also around the region. Sabi nga ni BP Sinch, there's unevenness, no? Which is true and still remains to be true, but both in the higher and basic education sector. So with that, we would like to join me in thanking our panel members and reactors for a job well done. Wala po talagang enough time to discuss this, maybe in another opportunity, another forum. Maraming salamat po sa inyo, and hopefully we will have round 2 of discussions in the future. So thank you, everyone. So for the closing remarks, may we call on the Chair of the UP Diliman Task Force on a Blueprint for Nation Building, Dr. Antoinette Raquesa. Ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nelson. Good morning to everyone. Today's webinar is one that is close to the heart of many of us here who are attending, who are now have had 2 years of teaching, doing research and undertaking extension work in extraordinary circumstances, or what many of our panelists say is a period of disruption. For more than 2 years, we've worked and interacted with our students, colleagues, and the public in a virtual world, in our Zoom classrooms and online transactions. Let me just highlight, and I'll make this very brief because I feel that I know that the reactors have done a great job in terms of responding to the key points. So I will not belabor my talk, but let me just highlight some 4 key points arising from the morning discussion. One is the question of the new or next normal, which the keywords would be disruption, change, and flexibility. We were also, the pandemic forced us to immediately change in the delivery of higher education, and which in turn made us realize that this demanded a shift in paradigms, pedagogy, curriculum, and metrics. And I would like to use the words of Dr. Bautista. This shift actually really is crystallized in the call for the shift from education to learning. The third is the challenges that we are encountering, and I will now talk about the access to resources due to poverty, inequality, and budget. Second is access to technology in terms of skills and the internet, access to educational institutions, both also formal and informal ways of delivering education, and access to program. And finally, in terms of opportunities, this period also opened for us a lot of opportunities, basically by opening the world of digital learning or remote learning. So we're now able to go into remote and face-to-face learning, and it has opened different forms and different nature of delivering education. We can go into lifelong, micro, independent, and granular learning. Needless to say, as Nelson, our moderator, said, maybe there will be a part 2. And of course, we would hope that this discussion, and also Ed mentioned also that, that maybe this is just, we need to, as we're going into lifelong learning, the discussion among educators hopefully will continue, especially moving into what is in next normal. This morning, I'd like to thank, again, in behalf of the task force, for nation building, allow me to thank our distinguished panelists and discussants. So let me, okay. So our speakers, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Cynthia Bautista, who's the Vice President for Academic Affairs, the UP System, Dr. Pat Arinto, Dean of UP Visayas Tacloban College and also Professor of UP Open University, Dr. Dina Ocampo, Professor of UP College of Education. For our discussants, our distinguished discussants, I'd like to thank Undersecretary Diosdado San Antonio of the Department of Education, TESTA Executive Director David Bugalion, Chairperson Education for Life, Edicio de la Torre, and Dr. Christian Brian Bustamante, Dean of College of Arts and Sciences of San Beda University and Pasco. Did I get that right? I hope I did. Thank you. Last but not least, I'd like to thank, as you know, like as the Chancellor mentioned, this is like the 6th in the series of webinars that the Task Force for Nation Building has organized, and for this specific webinar, we'd like to thank Dr. Fernando Paragas, the convener, and also of this webinar, and also the UP CIDS Higher Education Research and Policy Reform Program. So Dr. Paragas and UP CIDS, the program, you have your work cut out for you. We hope that we have started something that will be continued. Yeah, and also Dina. Take note. To end, let me just give a little, repeat some of the what Chancellor Nemenzo mentioned, which is what Pilipilunas is all about. So as the webinar continues, what the Task Force Nation Building has set out to do since last year was to undertake 2 major activities. One is agenda building via the Pilipilunas webinar series, where we want to focus on key policy issues and feature researchers from different units and disciplines as presenters in order to leverage UP's multidisciplinary approach to problem solving, knowledge production, and getting into a discussion our representatives from government, industry, and civil society. But after the agenda building, we do hope to hold a 1-day policy dialogue with national political candidates in April, which we hope to present a governance agenda for sustainable, inclusive, and innovation-driven national development, consisting of a matrix of policy recommendations called from the webinar series that we are actually conducting. So this being the 6th, we still have at least 3 more webinars. Let me just announce that so that I can also invite you to stay tuned and join us. On February 21, we're going to have a webinar on economic recovery and transformation, where we will have as presenters faculty members from the School of Economics, and as discussants we will have Undersecretary Fita Aldaba of the Department of Trade and Industry. We also have Dr. Butch Montes or Manuel Montes of this is based a senior advisor of US-based think tank Society for International Development, and lastly, we will be joined by Dr. Rene Ofreneo, Professor Emeritus of the School of Labor Relations, SOLAIR. So that will be on February 21. In March, we will have 2 webinars. One is on the National Social Protection Floor, and the other one is going to be on industrial policy and nation building. So with that, we will of course give you updates in terms of the day and time. So to end, the purpose of Pilipilunas webinars is to demonstrate the policy consequences of research taking place at the National University. We have endeavored on our end to assemble research that we hope will guide policymakers and will serve as critical inputs to the policy debates leading up to the May elections and beyond. Sa inyong lahat, sa ating lahat, maraming salamat, and please keep us in mind, and let's actually look at May 2022 to get our voices heard. Thank you. Sorry. Last but not least, I'd like to thank Dr. Nelson Cainhog for ably, despite I know despite yung unstable connection, this is how we're, just goes to show that despite this mga disruptions, we will persevere. Okay, maraming salamat Nelson for your great moderation.
Di ba po ako, Dr.
Hindi ba?
Nailagay.
Oo nga, Professor Nelson Cainhog.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raquiza, for the closing remarks. But before we end this, at least for our participants, there's an evaluation form. Please accomplish this one in order for you to get a certificate from the UP-CIDS. So you'll have a UP certificate. The link is, I think it's here, bit.ly/Pilipilunas evaluation. So that's the evaluation form. Please accomplish the evaluation form. And also, please subscribe and visit the social media channels of Pilipilunas 2022. Stay tuned to future webinars of Pilipilunas 2022 by liking the FB page at bit.ly/Pilipilunas2022 FB and subscribing to the YouTube channel at bit.ly/Pilipilunas2022 YT. Thank you very much and keep safe everyone. Sana po ay maging normal, new normal. Wala na masyadong cases ngayong remaining months ng 2022. Ingat po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat.
Bye.